thrilled to have you here. This is the best panel at the festival, so I'm so glad you're here. I'm Becky Monroe, and I want to welcome you to the 2024 Tucson Festival of Books. The festival organizers want to thank City and Peppermint, and Uncle Bill, Peppermint Homes for sponsoring this location, and Carol and Norm Levine, Southside Community School, and the Tucson Medical Center for sponsoring the upcoming discussion. The panel will end in 1 hour, and we'll have about 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A near the end. Please make sure to stop by the Central Mall book sales and author signing tents after the session. The book sales at the festival help support the cost of the festival, and they also support local literacy efforts. You can also help keep this event free and open to everyone by becoming a friend of the festival or a sponsor of the festival. Please stop by the Friends booth or visit our website at TucsonFestivalofBooks.org. I'm going to everyone really should buy these books. They are amazing. I'm going to show you them so you can see how fantastic they are, and then we are going to get started. Alright, so first I'm going to introduce everyone who's on the panel, and then we're going to jump into some questions. I'm going to start with Yangsze Choo. I'm going to start alphabetically, who is a New York Times best-selling novelist and a fourth-generation Malaysian of Chinese descent. She is the author of the best-selling The Ghost Bride, which is now a Netflix original series, and The Night Tiger, a Reese's Book Club pick, and a Big Jubilee read section for Queen Elizabeth II's Platinum Jubilee. Due to a childhood spent in various countries, she can eavesdrop, badly she says, in several languages. She lives in California with her family and loves to eat and read, and she says she often does this at the same time. According to Yangsze, the Fox Wife and all previous novels would not have been possible without large quantities of dark chocolate. And I also just want to note her author's website is fantastic. You should go look at it. It has a beautiful picture of her at this amazing bustling party where everyone's talking and she is gazing longingly at a piece of cake. I'm going to please listen to some of this extraordinary praise for the Fox Wife. This is from Alex Harrow, New York Times bestselling author of The Starling House. The Fox Wife is a rich tangle of myth, mystery, and history, delivered with Choo's inimitable grace and precision. It's not a book so much as a beguilement. It enchanted me entirely. And from Chitra Banerjee Divakarni, the author of Independence and The Last Queen, masterfully plotted and superbly surprising, The Fox Wife will entice you into a world of magic and heartbreak, a beautiful tapestry woven from love and revenge and forgiveness. Beware, once you start, you may not be able to put it down, and I can confirm this is true. Next, I'm going to introduce Lauren Grodstein, who is the author of 5 novels, including the Read with Jenna selection, We Must Not Think of Ourselves, New York Times bestseller, A Friend of the Family, and the Washington Post Book of the Year, The Explanation for Everything. Lauren's work has been translated into French, Turkish, German, Hebrew, and other languages, and her essays and reviews have been widely published. She teaches at the MFA program at Rutgers University Camden and lives in New Jersey with her husband and children. Lauren Fox, who is the best-selling author of Send For Me, wrote, "In We Must Not Think of Ourselves, Lauren Grodstein writes with such a blazing commitment to the truth of the Warsaw Ghetto that sometimes I had to stop reading and catch my breath. But in the midst of the brutality, she clears a path for the parallel stories of love and decency. Make no mistake, this is a heartbreaking portrait of a dark moment, but this novel shimmers with light." And the New York Times also described the book as a tender, heartbreaking novel that grapples with timeless questions. Is collaboration forgivable? Can sparks of human kindness, however tiny, fend off hopelessness in the face of evil? And I also just want to encourage everyone to see the video of Lauren when she goes on the Today Show. She's talking about her book and a question about sort of how she came up with the characters, and out of nowhere, Hoda just said, "I want to be your friend," which I've never seen happen before, so pretty amazing, and I pretty awesome compliment. Yeah, I can tell. And finally, Luis Alberto Urrea, who kind of needs no introduction here. I know the book festival does not have a mayor or a patron saint or an emperor, but if it did, it would probably be you. He is an acclaimed writer dual culture life experiences to explore greater themes of love, loss, and triumph. He's a 2005 Pulitzer Prize finalist for nonfiction and a Guggenheim Fellow. He's critically acclaimed, the best-selling author of 19 books, winning numerous awards for his poetry, fiction, and essays. He is so good that he made NPR resort to swearing to describe him. It is difficult to find comparisons to an author as original as Urrea, a kind of literary badass who still believes in love. He is a masterful storyteller. And with respect to Goodnight Irene, Jamie Ford, who is the New York Times bestselling author of The Many Daughters of Afon Loy and Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet, and is also another person who I know is beloved here. Every once in a while, the universe opens its heart and pulls out a book like this novel, gifting it to the cosmos. In Goodnight Irene, a new element has been created, and the literary world is reborn in the image of Luis Alberto Urrea. His voice comes alive on every page of this magnificent novel. And so, as I go into the questions, in terms of meals and organizing sort of a literary dinner party, I did want to note this. He has been quoted as saying if he had to invite 3 people, he would invite Manuel Miranda, a few years ago, so you can change it, Mark Twain, because he needs to hear some rap, and the guest of honor would be the person on his shirt, Ursula K. Le Guin, forever. In a voice that's too rambunctious, I will just come back and bask in those looks she gave, and I would give anything to hear her say, "Oh, come on, one last time." So I'm going to start with a question about the titles of these books. These are beautiful historic novels with stories of people who do extraordinary things in pivotal and devastating times. I know sometimes you don't get to pick your title, but if you did, or if you had something to say about it, I wanted to hear more about that. So I'll start with you, Lauren. For those who haven't had a chance to read it yet, this is set in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1940, where there were more than 400,000 Jews under Nazi occupation. And in it, we meet Adam Pascow, a middle-aged teacher who says he barely remembered he was a Jew before the Germans immigrated Poland, but as noted, he would not be permitted to forget. He teaches English in a crumbling basement, and he agrees to participate in Oneg Shabbat. This is a true project, a real project that everyone should go read about, the Oneg Shabbat project, started by renowned historian Emmanuel Ringelblum. The title is also a line from the book, when Adam describes the process of sitting Shiva for his wife after she died. Could you talk a little bit more about why you wanted to write this book, and particularly about this title?
Sure. First of all, thank you guys so much for being here. I cannot tell you how amazing it is to be in the Arizona sunshine at the end of the New Jersey winter. So I'm very, very grateful to you and for the weather gods who provided the sun today. We must not, so I have never actually been able to pick my own title. For those of you who don't know, titles are sort of a marketing decision, as is a cover. And I have always just, I put in a title that I thought was sort of classy and suggestive and memorable, and have been told time and time again that it's actually terrible. And so I chose We Must Not Think of Ourselves because it was a line from the book that I liked, and it does speak to Shiva. Shiva, for those of you who don't know, is a week-long period after a funeral where one does not think of oneself. One thinks of the mourners, one thinks of the dead, one thinks of how to make others more comfortable, and one covers the mirrors, sits on hard boxes. The idea is really to put thoughts of yourself away. So in one way, We Must Not Think of Ourselves as a nod to the 6 million people who had nobody to sit Shiva for them. In another way, We Must Not Think of Ourselves speaks to the paradox of the ghetto. We Must Not Think of Ourselves speaks to the paradox of the ghetto, where to think of other people, to try to save other people, is almost certainly to imperil your own life, but to not think of others is to lose the essential humanity that makes you a person, that makes you Jewish. So to think of yourself presents a real quandary in these circumstances. Briefly, Adam, the protagonist, joins the secret archivist group called Oneg Shabbat. It's a real thing. You can see the archive, which has diary entries and drawings and newspapers. It's the largest collection of first-person documents collected by Jews in the Holocaust. It's in a very small museum in Poland that nobody ever goes to, but it costs $3, and if you're in Warsaw, you should go. And I spent a lot of time thinking about the archival project and almost 2 seconds thinking about the title, because of course they were going to change it anyway, so who cares? Imagine my shock when they said, oh, it's perfect. So there it is, yeah.
And for Yangsze Choo, the fox wife, and the fox wife Snow, who's a female fox, is able to take the form of a woman who hunts for the man who killed her daughter. She does this in 1908, it's the end of the Qing dynasty. I wanted to hear more. One of the things I think is so powerful is how Snow can see us better than we see ourselves. We also meet Bao, a detective. Why did you want to tell the story of the fox wife, and what did you think, and why did you want to tell it this time in Chinese history? So, thank you. And anything about the title you want to share?
Okay, well, thank you as well. Thank you for having us. This is such an exciting crowd. The Fox Wife is my third novel, and it's the only novel in which I came up with the title as well. And so Lauren, I loved hearing your story, but it is true that many times titles are chosen by marketing. In my case, they were all chosen by my agent because I am really bad at choosing titles. So my first novel, I wanted to call it Tales of a Malayan Ghost Bride, and my agent was like, no, we're just going to call it The Ghost Bride, okay? Because it's about the marriage of the living to the dead. And the second title I said, how about The Coroner's Chinese Boy? As I was trying to stuff everything possible into it, she's like, that sounds bad in many ways. We'll call it The Night Tiger. And so this time round, I realized I should start a title with The, because the other ones did. But in this case, the title came to me very early, and The Fox Wife talks about this idea that foxes can take human form. So in Chinese, Korean, and Japanese literature, there is the belief that foxes, which are creatures which are both revered and feared, possibly as a relic of an ancient fox cult or shamanistic religion, are able to take on the form of very attractive men and women, and then they spend their time doing what you might guess foxes do, which is being very tricky and cheating people. So when I grew up, there were a lot of stories I read about these strange creatures, and they were always told from the human point of view, more specifically from a male point of view, because the typical fox story is that a scholar who is studying late at night hears a tap at the door, and in comes a beautiful woman, whom he later realizes is not human. So that raised all sorts of questions for me, like who were these creatures, why did they come, why did they disturb other people's exams? There's got to be something in there about studying. So, and I was always curious about what lay on the other side of the door at night. And the fox wife is sort of an acknowledgement to the idea that in the traditional fox tale, it is the man who tames this creature by either marrying her or taking her as a concubine. And so if you read the novel, you have to sort of guess whose wife she is. And so that's how the title came about. And thankfully, my agent was like, okay, that's fine. You can keep this title.
Learn the too often untold story of heroic women volunteers who worked with the Floodmobile Corps during World War II. In 1943, Irene Woodward enlists with the Red Cross and meets Dorothy Dunford, who become her best friend and family. They command these military buses at the front line, and they distribute donuts and coffee. At their initial orientation, something so powerful, they are told, you are here to become America itself. You are hereby commissioned to represent the nation and all it means to a young soldier facing terror every day. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the title. You've talked about how this was inspired by your mother's service. I'd love to hear more about that on the front lines. Her middle name, your mother's middle name, I believe, is Irene, right? So that's part of it. But then also, there's this awesome reference to Honey Ledbetter and Good Night Irene. So I'd love to hear about that.
Buenas tardes, Tucson.
Buenas tardes,
Yeah, my mom's middle name was Irene, and every event in the novel is actually in order, the things that befell her and her truck. They have been forgotten. The Clubmobile Corps, known, some of you I'm sure know them by this, as donut dollies. It was essentially the Red Cross, a Red Cross operative went to Eisenhower and said, we have officers' clubs in the rear, but what if we put the club on a 2.5-ton 6-by truck and sent the galleys into combat for the guys who really needed it? And he and Patton and those fellows thought it was a good idea, so they made the Clubmobile Corps. And the reason you don't know about them is because the Red Cross Records building burned down in the 70s, and they're literally gone, the women, all the women. There are a couple of copies available in the universe of a book someone made and printed herself, which has been very helpful to us. But anyway, my mom suffered a lot of things, and it was a great adventure until it wasn't. They liberated Buchenwald. You never imagined donut girls helping to liberate Buchenwald. And just as a little bit of background about this, she still had her footlocker when I came into the world, her army footlocker, and I was under orders never to look in it. Good thing to ask a boy. And I went into it one day when she was gone, and I found all this amazing stuff. But at the bottom was her folder of photographs from Buchenwald. And I was perhaps, I don't know, 4th grade, 5th grade. And I'd never seen or imagined anything like that, and I couldn't make a connection between that and my mom. Because, you know, we make the stupid error of thinking, oh, mom, right? Mom's not cool. So this is my evangelical tour to tell you moms are cool. And grandmas are cool. So she came home, and I always say this for my brothers out here, dudes, listen, I know you know this, but let's admit it, women are psychic. And my mother walked in the door and said, we went into Mother's case, didn't we? And you know, you all know that. Oh no, what are you talking about? And so she sat me down and she said, what did you find? And I told her all the things I found, leaving out that. And she said, did you find photographs? And I said, yes. And she said, I want to explain those to you. And she said, we had to go to a terrible place. And General Patton asked us personally to go, that he needed us there. We thought that it was a prisoner's camp for American flyboys, and we stayed up all night making ham sandwiches to feed the boys. And we walked into that. And she said, I had no way of comprehending what we were in. And I had my camera, and I decided to take photographs. And she said, I was so ashamed of myself for taking the photographs that I stopped. And she said, I've spent the rest of my life ashamed that I didn't take more. So, and then she had a cataclysmic truck crash and was almost killed. So all those things happened in the novel, fictionally. And Dorothy, the truck driver, was actually her best war buddy, which we can talk about later if there's time. So my mother had serious, who knew what it was in the day, PTSD. And for most of my life, I was an insomniac because she screamed all night. She could not sleep, or she'd fall asleep, and all hell would break loose in her mind. So good night, Irene, is good night, Mom. Perhaps you'll have some peace.
folks do, and you've already heard, they elevate voices we too often don't hear. They also really focus on the importance and the power of listening in different ways and retelling stories. I wanted to start with Lauren. In your book, some of the times I found myself crying were when, in sort of odd times, it was when Ada would sit down and usually talk to a woman. It would usually be a woman and say, I want to hear your story. I remember one in particular, she blushed and said, no one's ever asked me about my life. And then he takes out his notebook and says, let me be the first. Again, these are stories that we will now hear because of the bravery in capturing them. Could you talk about the power of these stories and learning not only what the Oneg Shabbat told us, but the way in which they decided to capture them?
So one of the many smaller horrors of the Holocaust is that it took 6 million people and turned them into the means of their deaths, right? Like, you don't think of the Holocaust, it was a mass killing in every way that a mass killing is possible, and it erases the personalities and the good things and the bad habits and the betrayals and the petty grudges and the things that made these 6 million people human. But when I started reading the archive, one of the many wonders of it was that it just restored not 6 million, but several hundred people to their full lives, where they, like, you know, complained about their husbands, or a lot of them were just, you know, talking about what they could find to eat and the ways that they made it sort of palatable. One story in this archive, which again was comprised of the notes and the documents that 60 secret archivists took from when the gates were sealed in 1940 until the first series of deportations to Treblinka in 1942, and then again until the ghetto uprising in 1943. And just to give you a sense of that, the Warsaw Ghetto was imprisoning Jews for 2 years before the U.S. got involved in the war. It was just a very it exists on a different timeline than I, as an American, had ever thought of the war. But anyway, so I was interested in. I was so invested in talking about the ghetto itself, but of course I forgot what the question is. What is the?
In which, you know, because I think you were just describing that the stories, the way they told the history of the ghetto was through these powerful individual stories.
So each story, right? So as you're reading them, each story tells about a person. And one of the stories that I remember most clearly was someone was watching a little girl who had a zvoti, which, you know, like $1-ish, and she was. If you've ever taken a little kid, if you've ever taken, say, my daughter to Target with $5, you know that this is like an afternoon's, endeavor where she's trying to figure out like what her $5 will get her, and can she have another dollar? No, she can't. Well, how much is, right? So this little girl has a zvoti, and there were shops in the ghetto, and she's going back and forth, trying to figure out what to spend her money on, and finally decides on a cream bun. And as she's about to take a bite, a starving boy grabs it from her and eats it, and then a crowd sets upon the boy. And I remember reading all of that, told in a very sort of plain-spoken first-person way, and thinking about the different levels of story that are happening here, and the different levels of dehumanization that are happening here. And I thought to myself, it is so deeply I don't love the word relatable, but I could see every single person here, and I could understand the motivations of every single person here, and these people deserve to be revived in some way. And so that's really why I included these interviews with them, not only because there were interviews in the archive, but because through letting people speak in their own voices, they become more than just people who were killed in the Holocaust. They were people who lived in Poland in the 1920s and 30s. So that was why I did that.
Beautiful. I mean, because we talk, unfortunately, too much about how they died.
Right.
We gave a sense of how they lived,
Right.
which is truly doing justice. So for Luis, I wanted to ask you, and you just touched on it again, you talk about the trauma that the women of the Club Mobile endure, both directly on the front and when they're being bombed, and then also indirectly as the people who are expected to listen and heal. At one point, Irene talks about hoping their next stop would be in a place where she could stay in a room rather than the truck, and, quote, open a window and let all these secret confessions she had collected from the soldiers fly away like sad butterflies. Could you talk about this role as listeners and healers and how much was expected of people like your mom?
Yeah, I think that ultimately was their actual job, honestly. You know, I think particularly Patton was very aware of the fact that these boys, many of them would get a donut and then never be seen again. And the women took it very seriously. And you know, the Red Cross at that time had really specific rules about this. They had a certain shade of lipstick that they could, it was government approved, so that it wasn't racy or risque, just sort of handsome. They gave them silk stockings, and always important for combat, girdles, so they could put the girdles on. And each truck had a record player and records, so that they could play some favorites from home. And about every fourth or sixth truck was called a cinemobile, and it had old movies and a projector, so they could put up a little theater and show. So it was really about morale. And they had ledgers that showed where other GIs were. And guys could look up where their friend was, where they were at. You know, these amazing things. And they would deliver mail. They became sort of den mothers. And, you know, they were essentially asked to be, in a certain sense, a bit flirty in that sort of 40s style. But they were supposed to be the girl next door, the cousin or sister, or the mom. And they were all around 27 years old or so. They all had to have a certain amount of education. They were all trained first in Washington, D.C. how to do this. They had to learn how to make donuts. My mother was a disaster, she admitted. But one of the things they had to do was learn to play card games and board games. But what they had to learn to do was always lose. Which, you know, later on, if you met some of the women who were quite old, they're gone now. But, you know, they were a little cynical about it. Oh, boys, you know. But then they realized that the idea was to give them just some relief, some sense of being of value, not being invisible. So I think it was overwhelming, and there are a lot of these confessions and things in the novel. What was interesting to me also, though, is in all the years working on the novel, and we traced their steps. We went all over Europe. We followed the path they drove. Families had grandpas and so forth, and older women nurses who never talked, and then they would tell me something, you know. And so I tried to put a lot of those in the book as well. There are a lot of the showstopper kind of scenes where people telling me, you know what I saw? I never told my family. And I think, you know, if you divorce yourself from all the commercial stuff and the, you know, the showbiz business, we have a sacred job, and we can, I hope, at least temporarily immortalize someone's story. That someone would give you this thing that has been sticking in them for decades to help you tell the story. It's just overwhelming. So yeah, there was a lot of that, and I will say that my mom's truck driver, Dorothy, in the book, is this wonderful woman named Jill Pitts-Knappenberger, and they were all dead. And Cindy, who's hiding back there, my wife, we're partners in all these pursuits, to take all the trips, all the research together. Newspaper woman, much more organized than I am. And she was curious about Jill, so she looked her up to see where she was buried, I guess. And we found out she lived 90 minutes from our house in Illinois, still. 92 years old. And so Cindy wrote her a respectful letter, and she called us, and she said, I want to talk to Louis. And I was nervous. I got Miss Jill. I always called her Miss Jill from the start. Louis. I said, Miss Jill, I'm so thrilled we found you. I didn't want to say, we thought you were dead. She knew. And I said, I'm so excited that we found you. And she said, Louis, you must come down here as soon as possible. And I said, we will, Miss Jill. And she said, don't try to wait till I turn 93 if you catch my drift. And I said, no, we're coming. We'll come tomorrow. And from that point on, you know, she was amazing, and she needed a beau. So I was like her official, you know, she always took my arm, walked with her. You know, she loved Joy Juice, a Manhattan. And that's when the stories came. Because we'd go to the country club, and they say, Miss Jill, you look like you need Joy Juice. And she'd say, no, we'll make it And she would take a little sip. It was great. Because I was starting to learn to read her signals. She would take a little sip, and then she'd start looking at everybody at the table. Second sip, her eyebrow would go up. And then she would talk smack. She would insult people and send singers. So she was the opposite of my mom. She was not destroyed by it. She was uplifted by it because she knew that she had done something important.
For Yangsze Choo, I wanted to ask, in The Foxwife, I think there's a really fabulous character named Bao who is a detective. And I think about how he can tell so much from someone's voice, truth from lies. It's his extraordinary power, and he's such a careful listener. And I thought about how Snow also talks about how humans talk too much, and if you're quiet long enough, she said, well, people will say more than they intend to. Could you talk a little bit about Bao's power, the power of listening and observing, and the different ways that you highlight that?
Yeah. So I had not planned for The Foxwife to be partly a mystery, but I don't really plan my novels, so when I got to chapter 2, I typed out the words, the detective. They appeared on the screen, and I thought, oh my goodness, there's a detective. and it's this sort of carefree attitude, which my husband has always said, if you would only write an outline, there would be a great deal less of this howling and rolling on the floor when things aren't going well, and sometimes they don't go well. But I was very enchanted by the idea of this detective, because the book is set in 1908 Manchuria, which was northeast China, and there is a very long tradition of Chinese detective stories, which goes back hundreds of years. Many of them featuring most famously a judge, a historical judge named Bao. And he was so famous that it enshrined him as a god. So he's called Bao Gong, and there are temples to him. And so when I began the story about a detective, as a pun, as a Chinese pun, I also call him Bao, so that it's like your detective being called Sherlock Holmes, or something like that. So that's my hat, and I also thought, I've been thinking for a long time about, as you mentioned, the power of listening. Because we live in a world where people are very anxious to fill up all the spaces with words. Not just words, but with pictures and images. And a while ago, I listened to this study in which they said that our senses of hearing are very severely underutilized compared to the past. You know, because of screens, we tend to be very visual now. You look at something and that's what you're thinking about. But in the past, we used our other senses far more, and one of them is hearing. And apparently, they conducted this study in which they found out that people are extraordinarily good at being able to describe someone just from the sound of their voice. So they said that just from hearing someone talk, most people can guess the age, the height, what they look like, and all kinds of other things, like where they come from. So I thought this is really, really interesting. And when I was writing about this detective, I gave him a further quality, which in the novel he ascribes to an unfortunate meeting with a fox god. And I thought it would be great to have a detective who can hear truth from lies. So I have to tell you that I started writing this book about 5 years ago, and then later on, about a couple of years ago, my husband said, you know, I think there's a couple of TV series about detectives who can hear truth from lies. And I was like, oh no, and I think that's the problem about writing novels, particularly if you're slow like me. And so I thought, well, I just have to keep going. And I do think it's very interesting. I also think that each one of us has probably had the experience of having someone talk to you, and then you sort of feel like, actually, I think you're lying. But most of us are just, we're too polite. We go, okay, right, I know you didn't eat all those cornflakes. Yeah, they're by themselves. So this feeling of being able to judge so much about someone from the sound of their voice, from what they say, I thought was so interesting. And so I gave that quality to Bao, and he uses it in the novel, which blends sort of magical realism with 1908 China, a time when there's an old Chinese saying that foxes and ghosts appear in times of chaos as omens or portents. And that is very true historically. Whenever a dynasty falls is when people come out of the woodwork saying, I knew that the emperor was going to die because the water in my well ran dry 3 weeks ago. So we are, as humans, always very interested in patterns and in stories. And so 1908 is the last year of the Qing dynasty, which was the very last imperial dynasty of China, and after which China was plunged into civil war, warlords, and Russia and Japan actually carved up that part of the country. So, sorry, that was a bit of a roundabout way of answering you, but that's where all those stories and the idea of hearing about what was true and not true came into play.
I think, and we've already heard about this, these books they speak very powerfully about grief and death and also joy. And in your book, I remember this part, Adam remembers a poem of Wordsworth, Surprised by Joy, and he talks about it. So we hear that, and he says, oh, it's that strange combination of feelings that accompany joy in the midst of grief. He described that after his wife died. So could you talk about that? I thought it was so powerful.
So Adam is a linguist. One of the things that's really fun about, I'm sure you guys feel this too, like when you write a character, you get to make that character be good at all the things that you're secretly, or not so secretly, bad at. You can kind of fulfill some aspirations in your characters. Adam, I love foreign languages. I've read stories about people, I don't know if you guys have ever read that they can pick up languages after hearing a sentence or two, these sort of magical polyglots. I've studied French since 5th grade. I speak French like a very not smart 5th grader, and that's as far as it's gotten, but I try. And so Adam thinks about languages all the time, and his wife had been non-Jewish, which was unusual for a Polish Jew. It was much more common in Germany for there to be a lot of intermarriage, a lot of assimilation. In Poland, among the Jewish community, there was less so, but Adam married a Polish woman, a non-Jewish Polish woman, who died after falling. And he thinks about the Portuguese word, which I'm going to now mispronounce, saudade, which, from my understanding, is a sort of mixture, it's a sort of kind of nostalgia mixed with grief. And he's thinking about that word as sort of the closest he can come to what it's like to miss his wife. But the horror, he says, of missing her is when there's a sudden moment of happiness and he turns around to share it with her and she's not there. And Wordsworth wrote about this in Surprised by Joy. He lost his daughter, and he talks about how at first her presence was a comfort, And then one day he's taking a walk in the woods. Wordsworth just could not stop taking walks in the woods. And he was walking in the woods and he sees something beautiful and he turns to tell her and she's not there. And he's surprised by the joy of what he saw and then the immediate sorrow of not having her to share it with. I was thinking a lot about grief in this novel for obvious reasons, right? But I was also thinking about what happens when joy tries to reassert itself in our lives after we've lost someone. When I was very close to my grandmother. I spent my 30th birthday with her in the apartment in the Bronx that she had lived in her whole life. And a few months after that, she was crossing the street and she was hit by a car. And I never spoke to her again. She was killed. And first of all, the rituals of Shiva were very useful. For the first time, I participated in Shiva, but I never understood what they could do, what that solidarity really could do. And so the first week, I was sort of in a trance anyway. I missed her very much. And then, you know, people go back to their lives, and anyone who's mourned sort of knows this. And my grandmother's spirit was sort of harder and harder for me to catch. And then my son was born, and I immediately was like, oh, I have to call Grandma. It was a year and a half later, and I was like, oh, Grandma, she better find out for, you know. I was surprised by the joy of my son, and I was surprised by the grief I felt that I couldn't share it with her. You never know when you're writing a novel what moments of your life, I never know, what moments of my life will reappear in that novel. I wrote this book when my son was 13, so it was quite some time. But that feeling of wanting to call my grandma was as immediate to me as what I, you know, as the window I had just looked out of. And I really wanted Adam to feel that way. And so that's where that feeling came from. English is a great language. English is, English is not as beautiful as some other languages, but it's very utilitarian, and because of its utilitarian nature, it's able to steal words from all sorts. So like, you know, pajama is Urdu, right? And kindergarten is German, and we're great at adopting other words, but we do that in part because our own language, our own, whatever our vocabulary is not necessarily as rich as other languages. There is no word in English for sad. There is no word in English for grief mixed with nostalgia, and there's certainly no word for grief mixed with nostalgia that is tinged around the edges with joy. But I think that's something that we all feel, especially for those of us who've been blessed to love and unlucky to lose. And I think about my grandma still right now. She would be super proud of me.
Lisa, I wanted to ask you, there's this moment where Dorothy reflects. She says, quote, "Women are called upon to piece the broken world back together. The boys blow everything up, including themselves, and then the rest of us. And we bind it all back together. The boys, the world, and ourselves." I think, you know, you talked about women being psychic. I think you talked about so much power in women and what they were asked to do. And I just, I wanted to see, you know, if you had anything else to talk about, kind of that you wanted to share about conveying women who are confronting tragedy at this time and who are asked to. I think you said at one point your mom was described as the person who brought the joy. Like, that's an extraordinary amount.
Yeah, she did that. Jill said that about my mom. She called her Phil. Her name was Phyllis. Phyllis, I read Phil. She said, "I drove the truck. Phil brought the joy." And I thought, I can see that. You know, my mom, when she was in her best mind, was very tinkly and vivacious. You know, 40s New York person, that strange mid-Atlantic accent, you know. And I've told this before, probably not here, but when Patton came out, the movie, remember? George C. Scott, "Mom woke me up. Dear boy." I thought, oh crap, what? I knew something was coming. We're going to the movies. Oh, we are, you know, I thought Steve McQueen or something. We're going to go see Patton. And we got on the bus and we went downtown. We sat down with our popcorn and stuff, and Patton began, and I thought, whoa, check out the old dude. What's amazing, that speech, right? And I watched her, and she was transfixed as though hypnotized. And she would comment during the film, "Oh, those pistols, we knew them well." Yeah. And when he smacked the boy with shell shock, she said he shouldn't have done that. That was a mistake. He just didn't understand. He shouldn't have done it. I said, "Okay, Mom, yeah." And then we sat through the second time. I thought, I just sat through 3 hours of this. Here we go again. So we watched it, and she made comments, right? And I got up to leave, and she said, "Dear boy, get us more popcorn." I said, "No, Mom." Third watch. But this is the thing, and she was so transfixed by all of it. She wept and laughed and would nudge me. I had no idea what she was nudging me about. But I realized she was reliving real things on the bus home. And this, to me, it was one of the little keys that helped me do the novel, honestly. Because it's really funny, believe it or not. They were hilarious, these women. So we're riding on the bus. I'm in a daze, and she looks at me, and she says, "Dear boy." I said, "Yeah, Mom. Georgie Patton was a very naughty boy." And I remember just doing this. Like, what exactly is Mom saying? What? He was what? But those moments, those moments of grace and joy kept breaking out. And to realize, for example, when we went to Jill's apartment, they lost track of each other in 1954. My mother systematically left her world and moved away. When she got back from the war, wired together, she was actually basically disemboweled and her legs almost cut off.